Good morning, everyone. My name is Harjo and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Human Movement Sciences in Groningen. I did this research that I'm going to present right now with my colleague Claudine Lamoth and our students Marije, Harmsen and Liset from Hulst in collaboration with Dobri from McMaster University in Canada. And it's about synchronizing to adaptively variable oscillations. One of those typical examples that's well known is the instigation of a switch to a more stable in-phase pattern if you start an anti-phase and increase the tempo. And so this transition into a more stable pattern due to the interactions between the rhythmical processes gives you the pattern formation to a new, more stable pattern, unwillingly often. Yeah? So this tendency to synchronize also exists on very many levels. It doesn't really matter what kind of oscillatory process you have, as long as it's an oscillatory process, that if these oscillatory processes interact, you get mutual attraction, they attract into one another's behavior, which causes entrainment. Entrainment is the adaptation of each individual oscillatory process. And implies stable coordination patterns, like synchronization patterns. Like I said, this exists not only in bimanual situations or interlimb situations, but also for two persons that are interacting with one another. Or if you listen to rhythmical sources like music or a metronome, you get the same situation going on. Be aware that if you listen to a metronome, this is a strict unidirectional situation. So the metronome affects your behavior, but you do not affect the metronome, which makes it unidirectional. But other situations are more mutual, like within our body, the oscillatory process of our respiration interacts with the oscillatory process of our heartbeat. This is a well-known phenomenon and well documented in literature already. And these kinds of interactions and the entrainment effects that are related to it have benefits not only for the interactive performance, the synchronization performance, the pattern performance, but also the individual performance. So in fact, if you interact with a very well rhythmically moving person and you're synchronizing with that person, you also tend to move in a better rhythmical fashion. And it all comes down to this process of mutuality. It appears, and several studies have shown that or post that, it appears that if there's mutual interaction, both ways, this entrainment and stability properties of coordination are much more apparent than if you only have unidirectional situation. Another thing that is important in this kind of things is that you have rhythmical processes that are more or less given, like a sinusoidal wave, as you can see here, a perfect harmonic oscillation. If you interact with these, that's not very difficult. It's like following a beat. But it has been shown also that some degree of variability in these oscillations or in these metrical structures may actually foster the flexibility or adaptivity of the agent, hence making entrainment more likely. Especially when this variability is, as we say, biologically organized. So it's not noisy, but it's more like of a complex or chaotic structure, which means that it is completely determined, however, largely unpredictable. What we did, it all revolves about this task. So there's a person that listens to a certain rhythmical stimulus, which actually pertains to a sound of a certain pitch that fluctuates in pitch, so like whew, 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 like that, a certain frequency, etc. And the task of this subject is to match the movements of the hands to that rhythmical pitch oscillation. In the hand they have a IMU, which is then sonified into a sound. So we actually make sounds with your hands. And this sound is actually presented in the other ear of the headphone, so as to match the two sounds. That was the task. So we call this task P because the input was periodic, fully periodic, perfectly sinusoidal. Then task C is the more difficult task. In this situation, the task was to do the same thing, so synchronize with a chaotic structured oscillatory pitch. And this is rather difficult to do, as some of the participants also acknowledged that it was. And then they have task AC, which is adaptive chaotic. What happens there is just the same as the previous task, but we programmed it so that the movements were actually affecting the input, the sound input, sound stimulus. So actually, if you perform this task right, you could make the structure of your input simpler, less unpredictable, because it was influenced by your own movements. So that was an interesting situation, because it actually showed that if people could match to the complexity of the stimulus, it actually made the task simpler. So they learned to match to the complexity. So these were three learning groups, and they practice these tasks, and pre-test and post-test, which involved periodic tasks but with a slightly different setting, and a complex task with a slightly different setting than in the learning group. And then we compared pre and post. Very simple. What were the outcomes? Well, we looked at cross correlations and root mean square errors as a measure of timing and of spatial accuracy, so to say, or pitch accuracy in this case. And it appeared that for the periodic pre and post test, all three groups had the general practice effect, so they were better in the post than in the pre, to similar amounts. So nothing interesting there. The most interesting was here. For the more complex task, the difficult task, which was more difficult to synchronize with, there was only a practice effect shown for the interesting group here, the adaptive complex group. And this is what we expected. So here's the biological variability, so to say, was combined with the mutual interaction. And here we saw a very large practice effect. What this looked like, here are the groups again, so periodic, complex, and adaptively complex. Here in the cross correlations, not much happened, no significant things. Although it might seem that it is increasing here, it wasn't. But the most interesting thing we found here, and that's where the accuracy, the pitch accuracy was much lower for the AC group in the post-test. And most interestingly, for all but one participant, this was very robust. So nearly everyone benefited from this practice. In sum, this means that if you are able to match your complexity to your stimulus, and this matching is mutual, as we saw, this enhances the rhythmic adaptivity of the agent. That's what these effects show, especially in terms of the pitch accuracy. Not so much in terms of temporal accuracy, but maybe in later studies we might find more robust findings there. Here we find that this effect was actually very robust over participants in that group, so all but one participant benefited from it, and that's very nice to see. Now, of course, there's a lot of things to say about limitations and stuff and settings of this whole design, but unfortunately it's very tweakable, and as already mentioned, we were planning to do that, and after this summer we are going to. I hope you like this message, and I hope to see you in person again very soon. Thank you very much.